Good evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Board of Education. The board has been in closed session tonight starting at 6 o'clock for the purpose of discussing employment of employee, actual potential litigation, and review of closed session minutes. Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Hirsch?
Present.
Mrs. Davy? Mrs. Ostojic?
Present.
Mr. Collins?
Here.
Mrs. Droney?
Here.
Ms. Conroy?
Here.
Mr. Crowcliffe?
Here.
Thank you. 7 board members present, none are absent. Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. We start this evening's agenda with student recognition. I will turn the microphone over to Dr. Krizik.
To understand, I think the success of any individual or any team is to understand the journey that they take. And I think tonight we'll learn from Mr. Rettel and Mr. Hedman the journey that the track team, the boys track team, which took second in state, as well as had three individual team members earn also distinctive recognitions in their performance at the state track meet. So it's really an honor and privilege for the third consecutive year to have this team come back and be the recipients not only of a statewide recognition, but to be celebrated by this board and by this community for the successes that they have achieved in a rather interesting season. So I'd like to begin the evening by introducing head coach Stan Rettel.
Good evening. We're a little surprised to be here 1 year later. After being state champions last year, we graduated a lot of seniors, and out of all those young men sitting out there in the audience, only 2 of them were with us last year at this ceremony again. So we started off the year finishing 5th place in our first major invite, and we thought it would be a rebuilding year. And it's a credit to those young men that they persevered. And later on, when somebody said, well, how are you 5th out of 12 teams in February and 2nd out of 180-some teams in the end of May? I said, well, it's a pleasure to coach a bunch of good, young, competitive men. I'd like to introduce them. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce one of my assistant coaches, Jim Hedman. Jim, stand up. There's one event in the state meet, the 3,200 meter. Last year we had 2 kids go 1st and 2nd in that event. 1 year later, we had 2 kids go 1st and 2nd, and those were not the same boys. That was 4 separate individuals, and Jim's their coach. A lot of my assistants couldn't make it. We have a very large team. We have over 200 kids on the team. We have 2 goals: to make it all inclusive and to be really good. Sometimes they seem like those are mutually exclusive on some days. And I have a lot of people that volunteered this year that helped out. But out of 200 and some individuals, then certainly what happens is, in just the nature of competition, the elites start to rise to the top. And I will introduce, we'll start in the back row. Trey, they would like you to come up here and stand. And Trey, come on up. Trey Kelly was only with us 1 year, but he ran the 400 and the 4x4, and as a senior and for a 1-year veteran, he did very, very good. Trey, why don't you come and stand right here? I got directions here to face the camera, so give him a great photogenic smile. Sitting next to him is an alternate on the 4x4, Corey Seacrest, and he also took on the role of Cecil B. DeMille down there, videotaping all of the events for us. Next individual is one of our senior leaders, Carson Engel. Carson is a 2-year veteran from being going downstate. He ran all the sprint relays for us and the sprint. Carson will attend the University of Minnesota next year. Carson Engel. Then we'll start from the other direction. Kevin Adamic is a junior. That's why we like him better than some of the kids. That means he's back. Kevin showed a great deal of poise in competition and was all-state in 2 events, the 4x1 and the 4x2. Kushpal Sangha this was the first year he was all-state in track. He ran on the 4x8, which finished 4th in the state meet, and he will continue running at Loyola University next year. Kushpal Sangha. Next individual came out as a junior, and boy, are we glad he did. Also ran on our 2 sprint relays. He also was all-state and had other honors as well as being conference champion in the 200. Connor Hennessy will attend Kenyon University in Ohio next year. All these young men have a story. The next young individual I feel badly about. When he was a sophomore, he lost his shoe in the conference meet, continued the race, bruised his foot so badly that it cost him a chance to go to the state meet 1 week later. As a junior, he contracted pneumonia in May, which cost him a chance to go to the state meet. And his senior year in cross country had several health problems that prevented him from running in the state meet. But his senior year in track, it finally all came together, and he was all-state in the 4x8, Adam Cecil. Adam is going to DePaul in Indiana next year. Cody Sharko was also a 4x8 member and came downstate as one of the alternates and also was all-conference in that event. Cody Sharko will run at Augustana next year. It's pretty hard to say something that after 40 years of coaching somebody is the best or whatever, but the next individual was the best manager I ever had. In many ways, he kept my nose to the grindstone, a tireless worker, very proactive. What's really cool is he's going to be the manager next year for the University of Minnesota track team. David Baker. The next individual also was a 4x8 member. That is traditionally one of the hallmark events for the York boys track team going back to the days of Mr. Newton. The school has held national records at that event, and Ron Hedman is one of those valuable contributors to that relay. Ron Hedman. We like Ron because he's a junior. And we also like Nick Gornick because he's a junior. Nick also ran on the 4x8 and was an all-state member. Mr. Gornick. And the 2 individuals that won the Masters golf tournament, they know each other. The next 2 individuals are the 2 young men that went 1-2 in the 3,200 meter. It was a very, very hot day down there, and they doubled back into the mile, and they did very well. But after taking a look at them after the 2 mile, I knew they were going to be up against it. It was 90-some degrees, and we just did not have a lot of training in that kind of weather. Jack Driggs, our junior, finished second in the 3,200 meter. He came back and finished third in the mile, and in this last weekend in the distance gala, which is a meet after the regular season, he ran a 4:08 mile, which is one of the best milers in the United States. Jack Driggs. The next individual, in a little bit different shade of green, Okay, it's fun to watch one of the real rewards of coaching is watch these young men as freshmen and as they leave as seniors, and the transition and the progress they make is really fun to watch, and the maturation. The next individual is the state champ in the 3,200-meter run. He will run for the University of Iowa next year, and we're going to miss him a lot. Andrew Smith. In closing, I'd like to say I'm always indebted. Nothing happens in a vacuum is one of my favorite sayings. I don't think it's an accident that this happens in Elmhurst, in a community that invests in its young people. We have great facilities. We have great support by the parents. And we have a nice tradition that Mr. Newton started 682 years ago. And it's fun to try to keep carrying this on. Hopefully next year we can say deja vu. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And, we've talked about some of these students being juniors and seniors. We've already had our graduation. School has ended. So first, on behalf of the board and school district, we'd like to thank you for coming back from your lives past York, for those that have recently graduated and those that are juniors. I don't think we had one sophomore is here, but for coming in and putting on a suit and allowing us to recognize your accomplishment. The coach made some comments earlier. I mean, we've seen 2 consecutive years of great success, but really, we've placed in the top 3 years in a row. We've had some great history, and it's not the same group of kids coming and doing it again and again. And I think that really speaks to the heart of our students and also to the quality of coaching that we're able to provide. So on behalf of the district, I'd just like to say we are incredibly proud of you. I know that there were a lot of illnesses. I'm going to give credit to some of the papers to talk about, one of the runners coughing up blood in between races and stuff. So really a lot of work. Nothing is taken for granted. So what you've accomplished is tremendous, and we're very proud of you. And with that, I would like to read a proclamation. Because York Community High School boys track and field team members, Kevin Adamnick, David Baker, Ken Bosenberg, David Byerly, Adam Cecil, Jack Driggs, Kevin Dunn, Nicholas Gornick, Ronald Hedman, Connor Hennessy, Adam Hibner, Carson Engel, Trevi Kelly, Ryan Kent, Andrew McIntosh, Anthony Pezza, Christoph Romanis, Kushpal Sangha, Matthew Schacht, Corey Seacrest, Cody Sharko, Andrew Smith, William Sullivan, and David Zytek have this year earned second place in the IHSA state competition, and because in individual competition, Andrew Smith finished first place in the 3,200-meter run, and Jack Driggs finished second in the 3,200-meter run and third in the 1,600-meter run. And because the efforts, dedication, and attitude developed through the sport of track and field can have a lifelong effect on the members of the 2010 team and on other student athletes, and because the accomplishment of this team brings pride and prestige to your community high school, to District 205, and to the community of Elmhurst, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Education and Elmhurst administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express deep appreciation and congratulations to the team members for their outstanding performance and competition. Congratulations. I always offer those being honored the opportunity to stay for the board meeting, but should you choose not to, we're going to take a couple minutes break for the students and their parents to move on. Okay, I have the speakers list for public comment. We don't have anybody who signed up to speak this evening. Just a general reminder, anybody who wants to come and address the board can do so before any meeting, policy meeting or regular board meetings. You just need to sign up on the green sheet, which is left on the table outside up until the start of the meeting. We are going to move around the agenda just a little bit. We have an action item coming out of closed session regarding employment of employee, and we're hiring a new employee in the district. I'll let Dr. Krizik do the introduction, but she is here to be welcomed after our action.
As you know, Ryan Anderson is moving from being the principal at Sandburg Middle School to the principal at Jackson this year, which created a vacancy. When we posted the vacancy in May, we did not know what the caliber of individuals that were going to apply for this position. I can say that we received more than 100 resumes for the vacancy, of which there were a significant high caliber of individuals that were applying to be part of this community. Amy Reed was one of those 100, who was then one of 9, who was then one of 3, and now she is the person that is before you as a recommendation to be the next Sandburg Middle School principal. She brings to us a wealth of experience coming from 2 high-achieving school districts, having worked in both at Stevenson High School as well as in Schaumburg District 54. Her experience in Schaumburg almost parallels the population and of Sandburg Middle School in terms of it's a high-achieving school, it's a highly professional staff, and it's one that is committed to continuous improvement. So we are very fortunate that she brings her knowledge of professional learning communities, of assessment, and of building relationships, collaborative relationships, all working towards the advancement of both educational, professional development, as well as student achievement. So I will, without further ado, let you make the motion, and then we can certainly introduce her to everyone this evening.
I have a motion. Mrs. Deroney.
I move that the Board of Education approve the appointment of Ms. Amy Reed as the principal at Sandburg Middle School effective July 1st, 2010.
Moved by Mrs. Deroney, seconded by Mr. Carlquist. Is there any board discussion? I'm just going to make a couple comments. We've all had the opportunity to meet with Ms. Reed. I know that she's been through a very vigorous interview process. We're very excited to be welcoming her to our district. We think she'll be a great addition to our portfolio of principals, not just at Sandburg, but through collaboration with other leaders in the district. So presumptive of the vote, I'm going to welcome Ms. Reed, and I'm going to ask all board members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion carries. So thank you and welcome to the district.
So this is your first cable TV experience here in Elmhurst District 205, Amy. So if you would like to say a few words, feel free.
Great, thank you. Well, good evening. I actually did not realize I was going to speak at all this evening, but I do want to say this has been a wonderful process. I feel very, very welcomed. I am honored to be here. I truly believe those experiences you talked about in my past have led me to be here at Elmhurst, and I look forward to meeting the needs of the community, working with the parents, the staff, and the students. So I look forward to getting to know everyone, and thank you, Board and Superintendent.
We're going to move on our agenda to superintendent's communication. Our first topic is the capital project update. Dr. Krizik.
Even in a fiscally conservative climate, we continue to monitor what our 10-year capital project plan is, and I would like for Frank Hsu to come up here this evening to talk to you a little bit about what our plans for going forward are, what has changed, what hasn't changed, and so you can have a little bit of an overview of the direction that we might be going in the year ahead with regards to capital projects. Mr. Shu?
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. Thank you for giving me a few moments to review with you where we stand with our 10-year capital projects. Since I've taken this position, traditionally we've reviewed this usually on the 6 to 8 month level. As you know, this was before you, I believe, as recently as March, so this is a little sooner than normal for a revisit for our projects list, but a few things have changed. When the 10-year projects as a rolling item to present to the board was kind of initiated when I was first hired, early on the funding sources were identified as existing capital life safety bonds, and then some of the capital bonds that the board sold shortly thereafter. And the budgets routinely reflected that on the bottom where we stood compared to those accounts as we spent those down. At that time, the spending for the 2 to 3 year period come up here was always projected to come out of which, in those salad days, were thought to be the budget surpluses we had realized coming off of the referendum at the time. Obviously, the state funding levels and real estate values and change in building climate in Elmhurst has made those budget surpluses non-existent. So the plan you see now still contains many of the projects that we had been listing out over the 10-year period, but we've no longer are showing it against a projected $1.5 million per year surplus that we can use as funding. So one of the questions I won't answer for you tonight is where funding will come down the line as we approach these projects. There's obviously a lot of different ways to get at that, and I leave that to others. What we do need to keep our eye on is what do we do with the amount of funds that we have left in life safety and the capital accounts for now? What do we prioritize in the short term, and making sure we keep our eye on some of the items for the long term. And just to share a few highlights, most of the projects that were originally, if you go back to the budget, this version of this document from a year or 18 months ago that were slated for the next couple years have been pushed back either to later years or indefinitely if they were not considered overwhelmingly urgent. The most expensive items still on the short-term horizon are the roofs, which we have been watching come across this document over the last 3 to 4 years, and now we're out in the 1 and 2 year horizon. What we've traditionally tried to do is replace our roofs or just resurface if they could be on a 15-year cycle. This keeps all of our roofs within warranty and minimizes the amount of leakage or water damage we experience in the buildings before replacing the roofs. With that said, as you can see, I believe there's about $1.2 million, give or take, a little bit of roof work coming due in the next 2 years, which is probably more than we can expend on that item. We might be able to get that kind of money in the accounts, but that would leave us without fund balances, which we've come to use for cash flow at the end of the year, and would also preclude us taking care of any other capital needs that arise in that time frame. You'll also notice that the building envelope section, a lot of the random tuck pointing that was on there has just been removed from there temporarily. The feeling is, and what we'd like to do moving forward, is that we are not going to have the kind of fund balances available to us to allow us to identify buildings and comprehensively tuck point in a way above and beyond what might be immediately needed. Just doing a whole wall of a building or a whole side of the building just for the sake of doing the building. The same might be where we may have to try to extend some of our roofs past their warranty if they prove viable. So given that our 2 projects for this year came in under the budget that was originally set by the board this past winter, we'd like to expend some of those dollars in having an evaluation of the building envelopes at the K-8 buildings so that we can have a firm that specializes in this list our needs on the short, middle, and long-term horizon and prioritize them into, what really needs to be addressed immediately, what are we looking at in the 3, 5, and 10-year horizon, so that we can present, instead of just guesses and budget estimates to the board, hard numbers that you can work with in deciding how we're going to expend those dollars we have left, and if we're going to need to come up with dollars in the future. What we don't think we can do is hit a building and do the entirety of all the roofs in that building, even if they might not all be in peril or tuck point large areas, without an analysis of what needs to be done, given the fact that funds are going to be extremely limited. The aesthetic items, for the most part, have been moved off into the beyond 2019. That doesn't mean that they all will have to languish out there forever, but that's just assuming our current budget crisis. Our hope, of course, would be that at some point we have funding for capital projects on an ongoing basis again. Other items on there is that we do have a few parking lots that, while we don't necessarily need to do in the next year, can't be pushed out to the 5 or 10 year range. So those are dollars that we need to look at sooner rather than later. And some other smaller items we've talked about, the lockers at the middle schools previously in a board meeting, and while that was taken off the list for this year, long term, our ability to provide enough PE lockers to maintain those programs, especially Bryan and Sandburg, will become problematic without a replacement. We're repairing 50 and 60-year-old lockers where the parts don't exist. So that's why you'll see those still on there. Other than that, I won't read the entire document to you, but I'll entertain any questions and try to answer them the best that I can.
Mrs. Davy?
At one point, you had brought forth safe entrances to schools. Is that just not even in the spreadsheets anymore?
Yeah, I could put rough dollar figures for square footage remodeling for those buildings, but without some sort of currently unforeseen capital inflow, those would not be happening anywhere in the next few years. The same would go for expanding video surveillance throughout the schools, which is something we'd like to do, and some other projects that just, given the need to have some cash on hand to replace failing HVAC systems and just taking care of building envelope needs so that we are not experiencing water intrusions into educational spaces, we don't think that we'll be able to tackle those. We've also, plucked some of the low-hanging fruit there, and we're getting more and more, we're looking at the buildings where providing us the kind of secure entrance we want is going to entail lots of remodeling. Buildings like Sandburg and Field, where because of the multiple levels, because of where the office is located compared to ADA access, those will be extensive projects.
Just looking at this, to say that the situation is bleak is an understatement. It's very sad to me to see that we are pushing out projects that we had identified as things we needed to do, and now other projects we have completely taken off the list, and they were projects that we all felt were important and valuable. And the state of our economy, the state of Illinois not paying its bills and putting us in this position comes out screaming in a report like this. So I applaud you for prioritizing and giving us the critical things that we have to have done. But overall, just seeing this report is certainly depressing.
If I could interject one thing real quick. Obviously, following the research that we do and the reports that we get back on the building envelopes, any version of this that would be presented to you this winter would include a return of those roofs plus any tuck pointing and other building envelope issues that would be necessary.
Mr. Colquist?
Mr. Shu, when is the next year that we would be obligated to conduct the life safety assessment?
Right. The 2013 is our next 10-year survey. And as we've done this, we've obviously tried to anticipate the kind of items that show up on a life safety study so that we won't have as large a grocery list of things to achieve or accomplish following that study as we did 7 years ago. But with that said, we don't foresee everything that will arise in between now and then. And obviously, also, when you bring in a new set of eyes, you sometimes find some things that you hadn't thought about. So I do expect that will be obligations on that 3 to 8 year horizon from that 10-year study that we don't necessarily have funding identified for at the moment.
So thank you for not only answering the question, but anticipating the next questions, which you did, because as you pointed out, it's uncertain, it's unclear what obligations might be identified that we would be responsible for addressing in the next decade as a result of that 2013 survey. For that reason, and also I think just for responsible oversight of the capital needs and facilities management and the like, I do think, Dr. Krizik, there needs to be some process by which the administration identifies and the board is made aware of capital requirements that across the district that are important, perhaps not essential, perhaps those that haven't made the prioritized triage list of essential near-term investments. But I think the public needs to be aware of, and more importantly, the board needs to be aware of what those identified projects are, and clearly distinct from where actual dollars get allocated. But I think we need to avoid criticism that the board is not aware that some of those other needs, like securing our entrances or providing for what might be identified future life safety requirements and so forth, are rendered explicit.
I think something we haven't done before, which Mr. Shoes talked about, is having this independent building envelope evaluation. To have an independent third party essentially do an assessment of the condition of all 13 of our buildings to help assist us in identifying what our priorities are, as well as then to be able to come back and integrate what some of those other ancillary projects are, just to be able to have the picture always in place. I think that's the key piece there that Mrs. Davy brought up and you're bringing up as well, is that we don't want to lose sight of what potentially is critical to us. But I think the building envelope piece will also give us the necessary information to move forward with other decisions. We've talked about the status of Churchville, we've talked about Lincoln, we've talked about Field. And, without having a thorough evaluation of those buildings, we can't really have an engaged, intelligent conversation here at the board table about what the future of those buildings look like. And, if the allocation of resources into those buildings makes sense or doesn't make sense, if there are alternative options that are identified in the process. So we think we're adding another high-quality layer to this capital project piece this year. And so I anticipate sometime December, January, Mr. Shu coming back with the full report of the building envelope study for us to have a further conversation about some of the key issues that you're raising, Mr. Carlquist.
I think that
Later,
No, I just wanted to add, I didn't highlight it in my talk, but if it was in the notes that accompany the document that obviously I'm focusing on how to get through where we expect to be our leanest couple years, but if you look out on the horizon, especially at Churchville and Lincoln, there are large, right now, unfunded needs, and those only represent maintaining those buildings at a status quo. Those are structural O&M kind of needs. That doesn't address any improvements to secure entrances or the way curriculum is presented at those buildings, which, of course, the board would have to weigh before spending money on the building envelopes, on the HVAC systems, on the domestic water systems. But when you look down the list, those two buildings in particular stand out as not only maybe being unwieldy in the way they deliver security and curriculum, which, of course, would be another department's decision to look at, but just to maintain them as they are is going to be a large expenditure that we don't necessarily have funding for.
I applaud both of you for the suggestion, the notion of developing a more comprehensive, longer-range assessment, this building envelope requirements assessment. And I know it's a very challenging and daunting thing to do, first of all, because it's a significant amount of work, but also to do it without any evident inflow of incremental inflow of capital. It begs the question of, what's the purpose? But I do think having that big picture view is important and responsible thing to do for long-range planning, A. B, that information might, over time, lead to a different set of priorities or decisions that are made on short-term projects, right? If you're going to do massive reconstruction, you don't paint the building this year, for example. And third thing is if there are any, as you talked about contingencies, we don't know where there may be a boiler that bursts or other sorts of issues. And if you had a long-range plan, then you can decide you accelerate some of those capital investments. The last thing I was going to mention on this, and I think this is understood by this board and by those that watch closely, but I'm not sure it's always generally understood in the public. Unlike a lot of organizations or private enterprises that build in a capital replenishment portion of the budget or a depreciation allocation that says over time we can replace our capital assets in a certain way in a certain time frame, that doesn't exist. In essence, you call these capital projects, but these investments, these repairs, these are really repairs generally, are being funded out of operating income. And I know that this question came up a number of ways, for example, with other major capital projects like the construction of York High School. All right, great. What are you doing to prepare for 100 years from now, the next time, or with the other schools that you've mentioned? And I think it needs to be understood, there is not an allowance, a buildup of reserves to monies that are taken from curriculum or staffing needs and the like to begin to build up a kitty to tackle massive capital projects or building construction projects. So this is a long-range journey that we have to start with the master plan now if we ever expect 10 years from now, 20 years from now, who knows what the horizon is to be able to make some progress with some of these assets.
To that point, I just want to add the current structure right now with the taxing bodies and with the state of Illinois almost precludes us from being able to build any kind of reserve for capital projects. We would be subject to tax objections and we'd probably lose. And unfortunately, that is the climate right now. There's very little choices in the way that you can fund capital projects.
Ms. Hirsch?
Thank you, Mr. Schuh, for the update. I think the thing that I concur with my fellow board members, and the thing that I want to capture and make available to the public is, it's actually, I think I have a document that you gave us. I think, I'm going to guess it was last November, but I'm not sure. But it's a listing, a summary of the most important capital needs. I would actually ask if it's possible, with the materials, I know it wasn't made available at the board meeting. It's not on board docs now, but I think if this is still a relatively accurate document, I think it more accurately reflects what the requirements or needs are, as opposed to what you're providing with us tonight is, given that there are no funds, what is, what are we going to sneak by, fixing so that we can, keep things at bay, keep things moving. But if I just do some mental math real quickly, I'm looking at a list here of necessary projects, desirable projects. A desirable project is the gym lockers, the auditorium lighting. Units likely need to be replaced for chillers, for air conditioning, roofing units, projects on hold, talking about piping. I mean, this is not something that is extravagant in any way, shape, or form. And this list from, I believe it was either November or December of last year, adds up to $7.4 million. And so you can see the huge discrepancy between what our staff has identified as these are things that we are planning for, we are anticipating are going to fail or need to be replaced on a regular schedule, versus this sheet is accurate. It tells us, given that we have very little to no money right now to put to capital projects, this is what we're projecting. But I would hate for this to be misunderstood, that this is all that we're needing. There's two different things. So, I don't know, Dr. Krizik, if it's possible, Mr. Schuh, if it's possible to, take a look at this list. But I think it's important to the community to understand we've identified, and I also agree that this envelope review, looking at all the buildings, is going to help us firm this up. So maybe you postpone posting this, but I think this is a piece of critical information in terms of, given the physical facilities that we have, here is what we are anticipating. Here's the lifespan of the roofs. This is what we anticipate on spending. So I think you need both of these pieces of information to make a well-informed decision.
Yeah, I can produce an updated version of that and show you what it looks like. Those items do still appear in this document, and because the immediate need ones tend to be the furthest to the left, and the in-between ones are the ones that have wandered further to the right. I think what we wanted to illustrate is that the the roof liability alone would preclude us from doing any of the other things on that list if we need to replace all those roofs. So rather than just replacing roofs because they hit the magic 15-year, we really need someone to take a look at them and identify which ones need to be replaced now and which ones are in good enough shape to defer to allow us some flexibility to tackle some of the other problems.
I think that's an excellent approach, and I really appreciate that we're validating that just because the 15 years has expired, that we're really going to, this one might last 2 or 3 years, and I appreciate that conservative approach. But I think that the complete picture is something that is worth looking at as well.
Mrs. Jerome. I just want to express my appreciation to your group, Mr. Shu, and to the administration and the principals for the careful management of our buildings in light of the fact that we aren't going to be able to do what we had hoped to do. For example, to say that we are pushing safe and secure entrances out to 2019 and beyond doesn't mean that we don't have safe and secure entrances. It means it's harder to keep them that way. It's harder to keep them safe, and the procedures, by individual principals are, more involved than they would like them to be. We are managing both in that area and in all of the other areas with leaks and things that need to be done, and I appreciate the skill that takes, and thank you.
I have a couple comments, but a question too, and maybe you can just confirm this. I guess I'd like to give you credit, and I believe this was done when we did our most recent construction projects. We did look at what we anticipated to be some of the life safety work and try to fold those into some of the projects, and all of that was done within budget. So I guess, can you just confirm that that was part of the process?
It was indeed, and as those problems arose, particularly at the schools that had large amounts of work going on, some of those things weren't incorporated, but it kind of illustrates two things going forward. One is we've lost that flexibility to roll our needs that appear into larger projects, both for economies of scale and just ability to have the funds on hand. So that's something that we won't be doing going forward. We'll have to identify revenue sources separate from construction to take care of our needs. The second thing, and I think should be pointed out too, is that we will not be expending dollars on a complete building envelope analysis of Hawthorne, Field, or York, because Hawthorne obviously was just completely finished, tuck pointing, windows, roofing. York's is not in that 15-year age, 10-year age range as of yet, so that study could be done later. And we did this study with Field as kind of a test to see how it would go, and the recommendations from that study are dictating the scope of work that's going on at Field School right now. So,
But I know that we're being trying to be prudent with the small amount of dollars we have, and I think you are making wise recommendations here. I think it's wise to keep some money set aside. We're pushing some things out a little bit, assuming that we'll be able to get a little bit more life, but something always goes pop. So I think your recommendation to leave some money for unanticipated emergencies is a wise one. And I'm going to agree with some of the comments of the other board members. Doing the envelope evaluation of the buildings is important. We've talked, for a couple of years looking at some of these aging buildings, saying, we're pushing nuts and bolts things here out on the buildings. A whole building is something we really need to be understanding when we think that end of life is going to be. So I know it's probably off the timeline that you've got on here, but I think that's something really important for this board and future boards to understand really long-term what we think the obligations of the district are going to be with some of these aging buildings. And I guess just to reiterate one other point, we're not looking here at putting any money into buildings to add more effective curriculum. That stuff is really not on this listing. We're really looking at, plumbing, roofing, windows, just the overall structure of the building. So I know that we don't have a crystal ball to be able to look out into the future to say, are things going to improve? So I think having a cautious approach here is wise. One thing I guess I would like to start get visibility to maybe in the out years, and it's not a current budget, is one of the funding sources that does exist for life safety projects or life safety bonds, and life safety bonds are still referendum. Okay, so that isn't an option. Okay, so are there any other board questions or comments? Nope. Thank you very much. We appreciate the work you've done, also in keeping our eyes looking forward on this. These are going to be very important funding decisions we'll have to make. We will move on to the next superintendent communication item.
And Ms. Masterton is going to give you Phase 2 of the budget planning process for FY11. Last month, she reviewed the anticipated revenue sources, being very conservative because it's an ever-changing revenue picture every day coming out of Springfield. So there continues to be a great deal of certainty. But she will now review for you the high-level overview of what the expenditures are anticipated to be for FY11. Ms. Masterton.
Thank you, Dr. Krizik. Just as a little reminder, this was what we presented as the total revenue by fund last month, and it included $1,142,516 in transfers. And that's kind of, just to let you know, that's a little bit, it's the way that the state board wants us to do, but it's a little bit deceptive because it actually becomes an expenditure out and a revenue in. So it's a wash, but it raises your revenue a little bit. So just so that you understand that as we go forward with this whole presentation. Some general information about expenditures. They're generally broken out by object codes, delineating the following. And I know you know this, but for those people out there who aren't aware of it, salaries are always beginning with an object code of 1, benefits with an object code of 2, purchase services are 3, supplies 4, and that includes books and software. 5 is capitalized equipment greater than $2,000. 6 is dues, fees, transfers, and just miscellaneous items. And 7, the 700s are non-capitalized equipment, which are more than 500 and less than 2,000. And then we're also broken out, obviously, by fund. Education begins with 1, it's a 10. Operations is 20. Debt service is 30. Transportation is 40. In the 50s is IMRF, which is the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, and Social Security and Medicare. Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund is the pension system for the support staff. Social Security also is for the support staff. Medicare is for the teachers and the support staff. Capital projects is our 60 fund, working cash is our 70 fund, and 90 for life safety. And we have no expenditures this year in the working cash fund or the life safety fund. So I'm going to give you a breakdown of expenditures by fund, and if anybody can't see it, we do have extra copies, so because it is a little bit small. In fact, I'm having a little bit of a problem reading it myself, so I'm going to take the bigger copy out there rather than hold the paper up to my nose on that. And our expenditures by fund for 2010-11 preliminary include $81,509,000 for education fund, $9.5 million for operations and maintenance. Debt service is almost to $10 million. Transportation is $2.7 million, $2.9 million for IMRF Social Security, $792,000 for capital projects, and of course that is the delineation of the tuck pointing and the roof project that we're doing this summer. It is paid out of next year's funds, so. And that totals up to $107,475,593.07. This is actually a drop of 7.5% from last year's budget. And our change in general, we're seeing a drop in almost all the funds, but particularly in our capital projects fund, as we had several projects last summer that we finished up, and this summer we are significantly less on the projects. To break down these by object, we break it down by salaries and benefits, purchase services, as we talked about. And obviously, salaries and benefits are our largest allocation. And in fact, the allocation, and I'm going to find it on here, equals 71.43% of the total budget, all funds in there. The next highest cost district-wise is in dues, fees, and miscellaneous expenditures, but that also includes almost $10 million in debt payments. So that's why it's so high. We have a drop in capitalized equipment due to the completion of the major construction projects. And in an effort to be cost-conscious, we have also reduced furniture and technology purchases under the non-capitalized equipment. Our next part is operating funds, and as we talked about, our operating funds are education, operations and maintenance, transportation, and IMRF Social Security. They would normally also have working cash, so you'll see that on the revenue side, but since we don't have any expenditures in working cash, I'm not including it in here. And based on that, the salaries and benefits comprise almost 80% of all expenditures in the operating fund. So that is our largest expenditure, and so obviously we're personnel-oriented here. With purchase services being on the second, and it includes professional development, transportation, special ed outside services, and contracts with tech providers, and it comprises almost 10% of the budget in there. I broke out for you also the education fund, our largest funds. Education fund, we are projecting a 2.83% change in budgeted salaries from the prior year budget. A drop in benefits. I think we were a little high on our budgets last year on benefits. At this point, that's the way it looks. We are dropping our ed fund purchase services, and we talked about many of the $2.8 million in budget cuts had to do with professional development, some scoring of some tests that we're no longer doing, and some other things like that. We do see an increase in ed fund supplies of 3.61%. That is basically just in terms of having an adoption this year, the science adoption, which hopefully you'll approve with the consent agenda. We talked about the capital equipment going down significantly. Dues and fees, that includes the transfers, so that's where that increase falls in. And again, non-capitalized equipment is down, as we discussed. Operations and maintenance, we're seeing a very small amount in salaries and obviously a drop in benefits. The reason why we're seeing a drop in salaries is because we did have those reductions that were included, one full person and the half-time energy manager, so that actually dropped salaries down. Purchase services are down about 1%. Mr. Hsu felt that he needed to have a lot of more supplies this year, that we were running a little lower on supplies than we would like, so he chose to put a little bit more money into supplies and a little less in purchase services. Capitalized equipment is also down by a third, and the dues and fees includes the transfer for debt certificates into the debt service fund. And then non-capitalized equipment is at $50,000. We didn't have non-capitalized equipment last year, and I will delineate what that is in future slides from there. So we're seeing a 0.82% increase for operations and maintenance fund. Our largest increase in any of the funds is the transportation fund at 8%, and that is in large part because of the services going up. We have had a really strong rise in special ed transportation costs, and that's dictated by an IEP. It's also dictated by the amount of field trips and other curricular activities that take place, for instance, at the transition center, in which we may have to use Cottage Hill. So that's been an ongoing process that has certainly gone up quite a bit from prior years. In fact, 15% is a pretty large increase in there. To talk about the budget requisitions and the large cost items, in the ed fund for purchase services, We include special ed memberships in our co-ops and in Infinitec, which is Infinitec is a kind of a rental service for special ed assistive technology and equipment. Consultations for staff development. Nurses contract is always one of our biggest items for purchase services in the Ed Fund. Warranties and tech support. Workers' compensation insurance and liability coverages. New this year is an additional $7,750 for ID theft coverage. Unemployment compensation, and, for instance, Skyward hosting, testing, and scoring. Those are all our large ticket items in purchase services in the Ed Fund. In the O&M Fund, our large cost items are utilities and general maintenance and repairs by outside contractors that are not able to be completed by our own staff. In transportation, as we talked about, it's bus services, and in our capital projects, the roof repair and tuck pointing all falls under purchase services. Our large cost items in supplies and books fall into curricular adoptions, RTI supplies supported by ARRA funds and IDEA funds, software licenses, library books, and food purchases for lunch and breakfast programs. In the Operations and Maintenance Fund, our largest requisitions come for general janitorial and maintenance supplies and fuel for vehicles. And obviously, fuel is rising a little bit again. So it's not as bad as it was last year, though. And in transportation, our largest cost item is for our software and our fuel surcharge under supplies. In capitalized equipment, over $2,000. Our largest items are for servers, switches, drives, and media system for York, warmers for food service, and miscellaneous emergency repairs, which are replacements. I think I put in about $15,000 in miscellaneous emergency replacements. In the O&M Fund, we're hoping to purchase lawn groomers and tractors as we continue our work in trying to keep everything up and running. And for our non-capitalized equipment budget requisitions in Ed Fund, musical instruments fall in that. Those are greater than $500 but less than $2,000. Special ed equipment, including assistive tech that we purchase outright, laptop carts for new teachers and laptops for new teachers, miscellaneous computers, printers, and peripherals, and transfers for computer leases that fell into that area. And then in the O&M Fund, we're needing more vacuums, scrubbers, and extractors. In our dues, fees, and miscellaneous budget requisitions, ed and debt service funds include private tuition, and that is for private school tuition for special ed services, occupational therapists, physical therapists, itinerant services, and public tuition. Other lease transfers for tech services, copier lease transfers, dues to professional organization. Here come all those initials: IASB, LEND, ASCD, IASA, IASBO, IPA, and NSBA. Do you want me to tell you? Do I need to tell you all of those? What they all are? Good. And also our Illinois State Board of Education tech loan payments come out of dues, fees, and miscellaneous budgets. Our next steps would be to finalize and close our June 2009-10 fiscal year, which we'll be doing in the next week or two. Incorporate any new revenue and expenditure changes into the 2010-11 budget. Present tentative legal budget to the Board of Education at the July meeting. We can either begin the 30-day review process after that July 20th meeting, or we can wait until August if you have more questions, and we can go ahead and do it at our August meeting. And we would ask to adopt the budget no later than the September 28th business meeting, as by law we have to have it adopted by September 30th. The one thing that I would let you know, which I didn't include in my information because I wanted to have a little bit more information about what's going on with revenue. In a comparison between revenue and expenditures without fund balances being part of it, each of the funds is slightly overexpended. However, in total, the operating funds are overexpended by $662,000. However, we have also just received, as I have been delineating to you about additional revenue, $643,000. So we're pretty close right now. We'll be re-reviewing everything else, and with the governor's new budget, we do know we'll be getting more general state aid money. That's one thing that we can generally count on is our general state aid money. There's many other things we can't count on, but general state aid is generally the one that we can count on. And so there, we had originally used the first governor's budget, which had a reduction of $250 per student. And so we were using $2.7 million. They have restored it to current levels, which would mean that we would be at close to $3.2 million. So that's an additional $500,000 as well. Then we have some other areas where they've also restored funds. In fact, Ms. Sullivan, Dr. Sullivan has sent me reading, the Reading Improvement Grant is actually more money allotted for next year than we're receiving this year, or we were allotted this year, because we haven't received a penny this year. So it's, you know, it's one of those things where you kind of go, oh. So that was the good news, that we are expecting some additional revenue. The bad news is that we definitively know that the two payments, the two middle payments, the second and third payments on our categoricals will probably not come until December. And ordinarily, there is a 60-day rule so that they have to have it to us by the beginning of September. The legislator extended that rule until the end of December. So we have until the end of December before we may see that money. And currently, that's $3.1 million that's outstanding. So even when they give us the $3.1 million, it probably will mean that there's something else of $3.1 million that's going to be pushed off until the next December, unfortunately. So we can only hope that something is going to break in the next few months in terms of state funding in there. And I will be happy to take any questions on this very preliminary and tentative budget.
Mr. Collins?
I just have two. Can you delineate roughly the additional $600,000 in revenues coming in, 600 and change, where that's coming from?
Corporate personal property replacement tax went up. I think I had it marked down at 1.6. It's coming in at $1.9 million. So that was 300 of it. Title I monies came in. Oh, I know. ARRA, I had to think about that for a second. I have so many in there. ARRA funds, if you remember, we talked about this at the last meeting. They actually had projected pretty low, and then ISB realized that they hadn't figured it out properly, and so they brought us in another $390,000 or so. There was another $10,000 that was that we found just mismatched in our budgeting process for operations and maintenance fund as well. So.
And then my second question is,
You mean the IDEA difference?
Yes.
IDEA difference instead of ARRA difference,
I'm
correct?
sorry, it was IDEA difference. Yeah.
okay, my second question is, you have 1.1 million in fund transfers. Can you give us a walkthrough of what's being transferred from where to where?
Last year, Illinois State Board of Education issued some new rules about the way that they wanted us to report debt. Previously, the debt service fund was for bonded debt only. So in other words, what you levied in for payments was dictated by what your bonded debt payments were, and that's the only thing that went into the debt service fund. So it was pretty close to money in, money out. Might have been a little crossover depending on when your payments were due, but it was within a couple of days you were going to, if it crossed over in fiscal years, you were going to be expending out that kind of money. With the change that they made, they requested that any long-term lease, and anything over 2 to 3 years is considered a long-term lease, any kind of lease, any kind of loan, any kind of debt certificates, of which we have, all need to be paid out of this debt service fund. However, the problem with that is, for instance, with the with debt certificates, you pledge money from a specific fund. In this case, the operations and maintenance fund. You have to take it out of your operating funds. So what you have to do is you have to transfer the money out of the funds that it's in and put it into the debt service fund where it is actually paid back out to the vendor. So what we have there is our debt certificates out of the operations and maintenance fund, our payments, our annual payments for debt certificates, for the purchase of this building, for some of the other projects that we did at Madison, and for York Stadium. From the education fund, we transfer out our computer leases and our ISB loan, and there might be 2 or 3 different ones that go from there. So they do total, and our copier leases. So that totals $1.1 million.
Okay, so it's all leases and debt service. Thank you.
Sure.
Mrs. Davy?
I realize that Ms. Schnorr isn't here tonight, and so this may be a question that perhaps she could address at a later time, but I know that we are a member of SACID, our special ed co-op, and there's a consideration of us bringing more in-house, that it would be more cost-effective as well as better for students, because bringing more in-house would also mean bringing more students back into our home district. And I just wonder where we are in taking a critical look at that and its possible budget implications.
We actually began taking a piecemeal look at that this year, and we looked at OTPT services. And when we costed out what we were paying for OTPT services and what it would cost us to bring it in-house, it was either budget neutral or it was going to cost us slightly more. We thought that that was a good place to start in terms of lessening our dependence on SACID. That's phase one. That was one part of that. The second part to this is that we have not yet done a cost analysis of the impact of us. Let's say it's a multi-year process to, let's say, become self-sufficient with all your special education services, and let's say begin the withdrawal process from the special education co-op. It's about a 2-year process. And there is in the, I think, the bylaws or the bylaws of SACID, there's a penalty piece, there's a cost to coming out of the cooperative, and you'd have to weigh that short-term cost against what your long-term gain is in terms of bringing everything back. Now, what that means is that it doesn't mean we wouldn't be able to still access some of their programs. Our tuition costs might be slightly higher because we'd no longer be members of the cooperative. But I think the first year that what we asked Meg to do was there a small piece of SACID for us to look at? We've kind of ruled that out now as not necessarily being to our financial benefit. And next year will be a year for us to have a conversation about, as we forecast financially in the next couple years, what's the feasibility of us becoming self-sufficient? Certainly a district of our size should be able to be self-sufficient and not have the reliance on the special education cooperative. But it is an incredible investment of time in getting that process done. It would probably consume 25 to 40% of Meg's time to even put the process together and get the process moving forward. I don't know if I have 25 or 45 or 40% of Meg's time to do that next year because we are only in year 2 of our RTI implementation. And we'll also be transitioning a supervisor at the high school as well and balancing some other things that we're looking at. So it's still on our radar, Mrs. Davy. It hasn't risen to the top of our radar at this moment in time. Hopefully over time it will, more districts will be looking at SACID, and it could be, I don't want to say a perfect opportunity to look at SACID from not just Elmhurst perspective, but multiple districts perspective, as many of us are looking at financial issues related to membership in the special education co-op. So there's a few factors there. Still on our radar.
Any other board questions or comments? I'm just going to make a general comment just about our process. So, several months ago, we sat down, we started to look at what we thought next year was going to be like. We had options out there. We had communication process with the community. We got input. And based upon where we thought we were going to be from a revenue perspective with the goal of keeping a balanced budget, we made specific cuts based upon looking at all the information we had available. As things have changed, there's different pieces that are moving up or down. If we were to believe, the numbers we have laid here, and you've already talked about some of them changing, this would show that we're going to have a $2 million deficit spending, which we don't have the pieces here to look to say, what does that do to our cash balance? Are we going to be in a borrowing position or not? But we definitely had the goal of not borrowing. But we also understood if enough things went the wrong way, we could potentially be in a situation. We didn't cut deeper than we had to because we wanted to protect programs. However, when we're going into next year and more information becomes available, I think this is going to be an evolving process we'll be talking about continually. So when we're going to have our upcoming discussion in July, we'll have public input at that point. Will you have, I guess at that point, what will still be the big unknowns? Some of these numbers are starting to firm up as we go.
As our LEND executive director said, it's like hitting a moving target to try to deal with what the state budgets are going to be. That's probably the only thing that will be really out there. I've place-held areas for any growth in special ed, any growth in regular students in terms of having additional teachers. So I've kind of place-held some money for that. By next month, I will definitely know what obviously all our fund balances are, and I will definitely have firm expenditures with the exception of those placeholds, which I always have, because we often don't know until September, October, or maybe even to January if we had a sudden influx of kids that we would have to open a class. So that being the case, there's always that placehold in there. The state, all I can do at this point is go take into consideration what it is that the state says it's going to give us and be conservative about the expectation that it's going to come. It's interesting because of working through, and often the PMA projections are not as minutely detailed as I would like them to be in terms of trying to match what's going on. It does a generalized class size and kind of figures out staffing levels from that, and it isn't always perfect, and they're working on that. It's actually going to be a new model this year. But in this case, it kind of came very close. Our expenditures came very close. Our revenue, because I was being conservative, came in about $1 million to $1.5 million less. Now we're hearing we're going to have a little bit more money, so I'm going to just try to build in some kind of safe net in there and to try to be a little bit more accurate, but really it is just hitting a moving target. So that's really probably the only thing, the revenue side, which normally is the one that you can pretty much count on, but that's probably what is going to be still moving.
Seeing no other board discussion, thank you very much for the information, the next view into the budget. And with that, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, the dashboard discussion.
If you remember, way back in January, I believe it was January, we gave you the first look at the construction of the dashboard, which was our endeavor to provide the community with information in a variety of different ways to look at our performance in basically 3 different areas: student achievement, human resources, finance, and operations. When we had that conversation earlier, back then, one of the suggestions and or concerns raised by members of the board was how to identify or describe what the color coding meant, the green, yellow, and red. And so we've put some definitions of what that means. And when I go through this, I will also show you what the targets are so we can see a relationship issue, which you did not see targets in the this January version. So it was maybe more difficult to understand what did the green mean, what did the yellow mean, what did the red mean. This is the home page of the dashboard. Talks a little bit about how to use it. Since January, we've added a few additional categories under human resources, specifically average administrator salary as well as average teacher salary. And so for purposes of explaining this, green is that meets the District 205 target. Yellow, it does not meet the target, but meets or outperforms a benchmark. And red is it does not meet a benchmark. So based on current data for 2009-10, actually 2008-9, because we don't have the 9-10 achievement data posted yet. That will come later this fall. This is kind of this is what our picture is kind of looking like in these three different categories. So what I thought I would do this evening is kind of walk you through some of these items to help explain why some are green, why some are yellow, and why some are red. I'm going to start with state performance. And when we look at state performance, what that is looking at is this describing the percentage of District 205 students that meet or exceed Illinois state standards. The target we used to indicate that was a green is that did we meet or exceed the state target that all school districts are expected to have with regards to the percentage of kids meeting and exceeding. We know that that bar in 2009 is 77.5, and we are currently at 88%. So for purposes of the explaining this graphic, this is why we have exceeded the bar. This is just the overall piece of all of the students' performance on all ISAT assessments. If we click on details and scroll down, what that ends up giving us is where did we perform in relationship to third grade ISAT reading, fourth grade ISAT reading, all the way through on these, again, state assessments, taking us all the way through 11th grade PSAE in math and in math. And in all areas that the PSAE is assessed. So not only do you get an overall picture, the high-level overview picture about where we perform as a unit district for all kids taking the state tests, then this is individually broken down into how do we perform as a district in relationship to each of the grade levels in each of the core content areas that are assessed on those state measures. So in navigating this dashboard website, you first see the big picture, high-level overview, and then it's broken down into individual grade levels and individual content levels. The national performance for grade 10, for purposes of explaining this, is that would have been the plan test that would have been taken. And so we looked at where is the national average with the plan, and you can see that as it relates to our performance with our 10th graders, we are significantly higher than the national average. This is an area that will be more fully developed with establishing a target at some point in the future as we look at where do our benchmark districts perform as it relates to the plan and how do we perform in comparison to them. Are we above them? Are we at them? Are we below them? And so that will be further refined as we continue. The dashboard is an ever-evolving descriptor and communication tool for our community. The national performance for grades 3 through 8, as Dr. Sullivan shared with you in October, there are the first 20 questions, maybe not even 20, 30 questions are correlated to the Stanford Achievement Test. And as she shared with you, as a school district, we do perform much higher nationally. The question over time will be that's great. We believe we're better than the national average. What is the target we actually want to set in this particular area, potentially as it relates to our benchmark districts, and how do we get that data? That's not necessarily reported in ways that we'd have to gather that data. It's not necessarily available out there. Our ACT performance, again, the high-level overview is that we are certainly above the state average. Again, we don't consider ourselves, that's not the target we are trying to meet. Again, that is a target that will also be refined over time with how do we compare ourselves to our key benchmark areas. Again, with the ACT performance, this is the aggregate ACT score. In clicking on details, you can see then what our trend data has looked like over the past 5 years in ACT reading, English, math, and in science, and where we have been over time. When we look at these things, we're not just looking at where we are in any given year, but we're looking at what our growth has been over time. What's our growth been over the past 4 to 5 years? And are we continuing to grow at a rate that we think is acceptable or not acceptable? Because having a score of 23.1 is fabulous as an ACT average. But if over time the difference between 2006 and 2009 is 0.1%, we're not necessarily growing in ways that we think we should be as a high-achieving unit district and high-achieving high school. Graduation rate, our target is 100% of our students should be graduating. Even though we're above the state average, our target on this particular one is 100%. So we are currently working towards meeting that goal. We're above the state average, but we haven't met our specific benchmark, if that makes sense. College or university, the percentage of kids that are going to be attending a 2 or 4-year college far exceeds what the state average is, and we have not identified any other benchmark target for that, because we do know that 100% of all kids will not be attending a 2-year or a 4-year school, because there are other options available to students, whether that is independent study, whether that is going into the military. A variety of different options are available to kids, so that will never be at 100%. As it relates to academic rigor is the percent of students in a graduating class who receive a 3, 4, or 5 on at least one AP exam. We have indicated that we currently are not meeting that benchmark. Our goal is to meet and or exceed having the number of AP exams taken in any given year equal to the number of graduating seniors in a given year. The number of, what, Karen? Yes, to exceed the number of AP exams taken in relationship to the number of graduating seniors. Now, it doesn't mean all the graduating seniors are taking those AP exams, but as we look at what are some of the indicators of what would be considered a recognized high school on a national level, that's the bar, that is one of the key bars that we have to meet. And we're currently getting close to that, but we are not there. And as Dr. Sullivan has indicated, we don't just want to meet that, we want to far exceed that, because our ability to far exceed that places us higher, let's say, on a national ranking of, again, maybe it's arbitrary, but Newsweek's top 1,500 schools in the country. And so it isn't just equaling what the number of seniors is, it is exceeding the number of seniors. And so as York is working to create a culture where all students are going to have the goal of enrolling in at least one AP course before they graduate, that is one of the shifts that will take place in order to help us meet that goal, as well as other the development of other courses that are available to make the full array available to students. So we do anticipate changes in that area over time. I'm going to quickly go through teacher credentials. Teacher credentials would be the percentage of national board certified students. We currently are not meeting that target because the percentage of our students receiving national board certification does not equal what the current state average is. So an area for growth. We do know that we have a rather large cohort of teachers currently pursuing national board certification. So we think by sometime next year, they will be finished with that 2-year process. We'll see an increase in that percentage in 2010. Teacher education level. That is the percentage of our teachers that have master's degree. Again, that's currently not meeting our target, only because we are not meeting the state benchmark on that. That is an evolving number for us, only because in years that we have large numbers of retirees, and they're replaced with individuals that are coming in with bachelor's degrees and only some coming in with master's degrees, that number is going to fluctuate just a little bit. When we have smaller numbers of retirees, we're looking to see that number grow of master's degrees. And again, we don't specify in which areas, we just indicate an increase in the number of master's degrees. Pupil-teacher ratio, our pupil-teacher ratio is less than the state average. We consider that to be a good thing. We don't consider that, we're not looking to be necessarily higher than the state average, so we can certainly see that as meeting the District 205 target. When we look at the pupil administrator ratio, we indicated that we're certainly not meeting the target and that our ratio is higher than the state average. One of the reasons for this is that we have smaller enrollments at our schools compared to other larger unit districts. So for example, I'll use Naperville 203. The sizes of their middle schools are 700, 800, 900 students. The sizes of their elementary schools consistently are 500, 600, 700 students. Our elementary school ranges from around a little over 300 to 600. So when you have smaller schools, it shifts and changes what that ratio looks like. But this, because it all is based on the number of schools you have and the population within those schools. We had a smaller number of schools, they were larger schools. This would look very, very different than what it currently does. In terms of average administrator salary, in 2009, the average administrator salary was less than the state average. We're saying that we think that that is considered to be a good thing. Average teacher salary is higher than the state average. We think that's something that needs to be monitored. While we want to be a competitive employer, there is at some point, we don't want to have our average teacher salary so significantly higher than what that state average is when we take in other factors such as the percentage of teachers with advanced degrees and the percentage of teachers with number of years of experience. And so we have indicated that that has met a benchmark, but it is something that we would like to continue to monitor. In terms of fund balances, we certainly, what fund balances is that the percentage of operating of expenditures, we've indicated that that's a green. We are slightly below the state average on that. That's where we are this year. That picture potentially will be changing next year. So that will either turn to yellow or red depending on what the outcome of that has been. Our fiscal health piece is what our financial profile ranking has been. Again, just as a reminder to everyone, the way we've managed our finances over the past 4 years, we have actually exceeded what the anticipated financial rating was going to be based on the forecast of the referendum that was passed in 2006. So we got to financial recognition years earlier than what was anticipated. I believe FY11 was the first year we were to be anticipated to have financial recognition, and we've had financial recognition from 2007. Again, that's been accomplished because of the number of days of cash on hand. Debt takes into account of that, long-term and short-term debt, and what our fund balances are. And there's two other critical factors in there. But at this point in time, our ability of not borrowing has enabled us to maintain that financial recognition status. As Mrs. Ostojic said earlier, we are trying to avoid borrowing at all costs. However, unforeseen circumstances in terms of a lack of revenue will be the reason why we would be borrowing next year if we have to borrow, not due to not wise fiscal planning and management. Does that make sense? So that's a key piece. Within the fiscal health, there are details as well, just to show you what that looks like, just a little bit more. The fund balance to the ratio revenue, here's all the different pieces, what our score has been, the expenditure to revenue ratio, the days of cash on hand, the short-term borrowing, and then the long-term debt margin remaining. And so it breaks out the details. We have both an operating funds summary. I'm going to gloss over that for a second. Our tax rate We've indicated that to be a green because our tax rate is significantly lower than districts of our size, unit districts. So we've brought that up during our budget discussions as well. For our tax rate is significantly lower than some of our benchmark districts that we're looking at. It's lower than 204s, lower than 203s, lower than pretty much everyone's. I think Barrington, we're close to Barrington, but I think Barrington is still just a little bit higher than we are. So we indicate that that's a positive. No details other than what the rate is. Our operating expenditures per pupil. This says what our operating expenses are per students in the thousands. We've marked this with a yellow, meaning we do spend more in operating expenditures than the state average. But this is something that we want to continue to monitor because at some point your operating expenditures could get significantly so high, and we want to benchmark that against what our student outcomes are. Our instructional expenditures for students are also higher than the state averages, which can be considered a good thing. The operational expenditures are not those things that directly impact the classroom. Those aren't operational expenditures, are not the teacher salaries, are not those kinds of things, but the other costs incurred, which includes, I think, health services and nursing services and administrative costs and so on and so forth. So it's always your operating expenditures as well as your instructional expenditures that you need to monitor. But considering the fact that we currently do expend more than the state average in instructional expenditures, we believe at this point in time that's considered to be a good thing. I purposely did a quick high-level overview of all of this because this dashboard is going to be an evolving tool that is going to be updated as we get new data and new information. Some sections will change before others. So example, finance and operating expenditures are going to change before we change the student achievement section. Our student achievement section will happen at various times during the year. We will know academic rigor when we receive the AP report in May. We will know the graduation rate at the end of a school year, and we will know things like state performance, national performance, state performance, K-12 based on ISAT and PSAE scores, which are officially released in October, and then our plan test whenever we decide to administer the plan in future years forthcoming on that. So it will always be a dashboard that is going to change when new data becomes available, so that in some places we'll see 2009 or 2010 data when it becomes available, but until it becomes available, it won't be posted. Things like the instructional expenditures and operating expenditures, the State Board of Education on the school report card is generally 2 years behind on that because of when the audits, when the final financial reports are due to the State Board of Education. Those come after the school report cards are published. So we're a little bit in arrears on that. So any questions about the look of this dashboard and some of the changes that were made based on the feedback that we received from all of you? Mr. Collins?
I think just some general comments. I think we're headed in the right direction. I still like the idea of a trend next to each of those performance criteria that would just say positive, flat, negative. So to give people an idea at a glance of the direction we're headed. And I understand that we're comparing ourselves to the state benchmark. And I realize that will evolve into our benchmark districts, which I think is a better measure. I just, I want to set the bar as high as possible. I want to set the bar to our benchmark districts, and eventually, maybe the benchmark is the 10 highest performing districts in the state. That's my general comments.
Ms. Hirsch. I would concur with Mr. Collins that we're moving in the right direction. I think the green, yellow, red designation definitely is clearer. The one thing that I am missing is, without Dr. Krizik, your explanation of what the goal is, someone coming and looking at this, I'm trying to remember one specifically.
Let's use
Maybe
state-
teacher, the teacher credentials. I think it is a disservice to our teaching staff if you were to look at this and go, teacher credentials are red. And then you'd click on it, and then you need to see or read more than what is, the following graph shows the overall percentage of District 205 teachers that are national board certified. I think, I hate to ask for more, but I think we need to say that one of our stated goals as a district is that we increase the population of national board certified teachers. It would be an unrealistic goal to say that every single teacher in our district is national board certified. And I think if we provided some context and said, our teachers are highly qualified teachers, and we have set a stretch goal, we have determined, our district has taken on this additional goal of saying our goal is to have 10% or whatever it is. And I would actually, toss out there for the board's consideration is these are goals that are set by you so far. Some of these in terms of fund balances, those are actually tied to board policy. And I don't know, again, that there might be a discussion. I mean, we've had, concurrence on the strategic plan on what our specific strategic plan is addressing, but I don't know that we've drilled down to the level, or we have exposed on each of these what our strategic plan goal is. So I think I'm concerned. I think it's a great step in the right direction, but I believe that there needs to be something for each one of these that describes what the benchmark is that we have set.
And we can add that narrative. We can add that narrative to this. Again, using teacher credentials as an example, we, at this point in time, haven't set a target even higher than the state average. And even in our strategic plan, we never put a percentage. What I think it was more generally stated that we'll see a continual increase in the number of our teachers that are nationally board certified. We do know it's a 2-year process. And so if we did not have anyone last year become national board certified, which we didn't, then or this year, because our cohort just started in the fall, correct, David? Didn't we have a national board certified cohort? They wouldn't be ready to be nationally board certified until, let's say, the spring of next year. So there is some additional narrative that we can add to that to help explain. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
I think that the one thing for me that needs to be crystal clear is there's state averages and then there's district. There's state goals or state averages, and then there's District 205 goals or averages. And I think we need to be clear, in this case, we're not ready to meet the state average, so we've set our the district goal is this.
Right. The yellow bar on here, just so that you see, that can become what our target is. The black is what the state is. Okay. So we have all the flexibility in the world to define what our goal is. And as Mr. Collins suggested, and as we've talked in cabinet too, is how do we also collect the data from our benchmark districts? Because not all of it's readily available, let's say, on a school report card. Not all of it's readily available on their websites. And so it's getting them to share that data with us. And some will, some maybe won't. And so unless we have all of the data on a particular variable, then we don't really want to set another target other than currently looking at the state target or one that we want to put out there for ourselves.
Mrs. Deroni?
I agree with Mrs. Hirsch. It was very interesting to hear you talk about all those things, but if a person goes to the website and looks at pupil administrator ratio and sees a red mark, are they going to think, oh my gosh, that district is so administrator heavy? I just think all of your little narratives need to be on there somehow so that we don't mislead people who are looking at that.
And that's why we tried to balance it with the salary piece too. So that was a missing piece for us, because that's another piece. So while our ratios are a little bit slightly higher, and they're actually going to be less next year because we've made some reductions.
They're higher because we have smaller schools.
Correct.
And that's a value in itself that doesn't jump out from that stop sign there.
Correct.
So those are the kinds of things that need to be explained right on the page if we can.
And there's plenty of room to do that. Mr. Carlquist?
Building on that, I share that interest, and I think the other piece that I think is called out, either in terms of narrative that's on that page, or a hyperlink to the strategic plan, but some, in the spirit of exception management, where we have yellows, where we have reds, cautions or warnings, that there's some description as to what the action plan is, or who the administrative owner or leader is, or where the responsibility lies, and what tactics the district is employing, even if those tactics might be a 12-month, long-term time horizon. It may be a summary of what the board has discussed and decided, but I think the one other piece that not only is missing, but I think would really be positively impactful as a communication vehicle to the public is, again, a high-level synopsis of, it's not just that it's red and, que sera, but it's recognized, here there are strategies, we've hired, whatever the game plan is, would, I think, be meaningful to call out. Because I know you and the staff has strategies, much like the school improvement plans. The schools themselves have their equivalent of these, maybe different categories and different metrics, but they have their detailed action plan. Very good. Thank you for advancing this to this stage. This has been a keen interest, and this is very high quality. Have you seen anything, did you pattern this after other districts, or do you see other models like this that we should continue to be striving to
None of
meet?
our benchmark districts currently have a dashboard that's available to the public. So in DuPage County, we are, I think, taking a leadership role. Hinsdale, the high school district, does have a dashboard. Ours looks different than theirs. When we had our first, well, even before we had the first go-around, we looked at some of the dashboards that existed in other states that we thought the format was better than because the ECHO group helped us design that, what that looked like. So Carpentersville is a school district in Illinois that has a dashboard. Again, theirs looks a little bit different. We felt that what was much more important, and I'll just go to state performance, we really liked the bar graphs. We were initially given something like an odometer, and we didn't feel that that was professional, nor did we think that that really was communicating to our multiple publics what we were trying to accomplish, and what that was. So we liked the concept of having some longitudinal data, bar graphs, because I think you can only, one of my favorite quotes is, history is the enemy of memory. And unless you have the history, you might say, I recall, 10 years ago, those schools were so much better than they are today. Well, maybe not. Maybe we are much better today than we were 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And so, putting out that longitudinal data is really very, very important, because it gives everyone a perspective. We don't think, looking at us at a picture in time of 2009 and where that relationship is into where our targets are, informs our publics in a meaningful way. We think what informs our publics is, in 2004, 80% of our students were meeting and exceeding. In 2009, 88% of our students are meeting and exceeding. We have a positive trajectory. We're going forward. We've made progress over time. And when you aggregate all that data, it's going to be incremental progress, especially when you're at those high levels.
Well, and your point about longitudinal comparisons is, not only might there be a trajectory improvement, but or might be better today than in the past, but over time we might, and we should, set higher and higher bars for our expectations for ourselves as well, which would show up in this. I think this is a great comparison to, you're hanging your report card on the refrigerator, right, for all to see as they come strolling in, and I think this is in line with the objectives of transparency that the board has set, and it renders explicit what our expectations are of ourselves. I think now the key over time is not only to make progress, as Mr. Collins pointed out, and have the right trend lines, but then also just have the right process going forward to validate that these, in fact, are the right metrics to have on the report card, versus, we could think of an infinite number of others.
And again, it's an evolving tool, and if there is another metric that we would think it's a meaningful metric that we can have data on, then we can do that. And so whether or not over time we have enough trend data on MAP data, or we have enough trend data on some of our other assessments, Explore data, then we'll add those pieces too. But again, you don't want to put anything out there that you don't have some significant trend data on, that you can't help explain to multiple stakeholders.
Dr. Krizik, I guess just following up maybe on some of the points already made, it seems that for some of the red ones, we're explaining why it's red, and maybe it's red because we don't have the right, we can insert our own benchmarks. We've allowed the state ratios to be the benchmarks, and maybe that's not necessarily what it could be. And you talked earlier about, in some of the other areas that, we want to establish our benchmark. So I guess I prefer to see the right benchmarks in there instead of explaining why it's not really maybe showing us the right view that we have. And I would agree with what Mr. Collins said earlier. We need to make sure we're setting the bar high. And I also appreciated the fact that you said, this is going to evolve. So these are the indicators we're starting with. You have to start someplace. I think that these are a great place to start. As we're getting input from, questions from board members, input from people viewing it, and maybe they're not seeing this the right way. If we're explaining too much about points, then, I think those are all great places to learn and evolve from. So I appreciate that. And I'm going to reiterate Mr. Kralkow's comments. I think that you've done a good job. This has really evolved from where it started. I think you've done a lot of research on your own. You've taken a lot of input from the board and used the experts out there to help you make this a valuable tool. Ms. Hirsch, you have some additional comments?
I just had one thing. I don't know if I was clear. There's two things that I think. One, we need to have a definition of what the metric is. So, for instance, the national performance in grade 10, somewhere, I know that I believe that you said that that's the plan test, but somewhere we need to describe that is, in fact, the plan test.
It does say that there.
Does it say that? I'm sorry, I couldn't
It's
read
okay,
it.
because, it's kind of hard to read from this direction. But I just saw it.
I could have missed it.
Hang on one second. Okay,
Just a high-level concept that, to make it clear, this is the standard that we're comparing ourselves to, and then the descriptor on the plan, which I really like Mr. Kralkow's idea of if it's red or yellow, here's a link to what we're doing to address it.
I like that too.
And then can you just share with us what your thoughts are in terms of where we are in the process for this? I really appreciate all the work you've done on it. And how do you see us moving forward from here?
Well, there's two things. We know that anytime we're going to put this up, there's going to be questions, even with the additional commentary, with the additional pieces. And I think it would be valuable to put this out there, to even get additional commentary, because that will also help us make some additions and make this evolving. So I see it as kind of an interactive thing. Someone can say, can you help us explain better? Again, I'll use your example of national performance. If we don't have the plan, then we need to explain that that's the plan test given to, 10th graders, so on and so forth. So what I would like to do is with a few additional tweaks based on some recommendations that came tonight that are doable, that we can do immediately, I'd really, within the next week, like to get it posted to the district website, just to begin to get exposure on this. Because until we get exposure on this, then we're not going to necessarily make it meet everyone's needs. And I would really like to be one of the, leading districts in DuPage County that really pushes transparency to different levels and be a little bit higher. Again, understanding that it's evolving.
Will we have an easy box to click on to post comments, to solicit that feedback?
Certainly, I can talk to Ms. Geddes about how we can put a link to have community input into any questions that they might have about the dashboard and or suggestions. Just like we had put something on the website with regard to the budget, we might be able to put, we can definitely do that. So it won't be on the dashboard itself, but it can be on the home page, and we can make that, visible.
As close to the dashboard as we can get it.
will block board members from putting on their suggestions. Teasing you.
Any other board questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, thank you again, Dr. Krizik, for your work on this and for the presentation. We're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the approval of board meeting minutes from May 25th, 2010. Have all board members had the chance to read through? Are there any corrections or amendments to the minutes as presented? Seeing none, those minutes will be approved as presented. Our next item on our agenda is the superintendent's consent agenda. Are there any items that any board members would like removed for discussion? Mr. Collins?
I have a couple of questions on item I.
Item I, okay. Any other items? Okay, I will accept the motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda absent item I. May I have a motion, please? Mrs. Davy?
I move for the approval of the superintendent's consent agenda minus item I.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mrs. Conroy. All in favor? I'm sorry, we have
Voice.
payment of reports, so Mrs. Walsh, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Davy?
Yes.
Ms. Conroy? Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mr. Carlquist? Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Ostojic?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. May I have a motion for item I, please? Mr. Carlquist.
I move the approval of the grade 6 or 8 science materials.
Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mrs. Deroni. Is there any board discussion on this item? Mr. Collins?
Just my quick question. We put these out for public display. We put this proposed science materials out for public display, and the publisher had not finished all of their work quite yet, particularly for the, I guess, the tests and what else was?
Mostly the online.
And the online, the technology. What is the are they on schedule to deliver that?
Last I talked to Mr. Sprandell, we actually had the representatives in, I want to say, maybe 2 weeks ago, and they were on schedule.
Okay.
We only had, and Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, only one person come to view them on display. With no comments?
Thank you.
We're adopting instructional materials. We're not actually paying a bill here, so we could do a voice vote for this one, correct? Any other board discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The motion carries. Our next item on our agenda is just a reminder of upcoming meetings. We have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday, July 20th, a Board of Education business meeting here and in the District 205 Center. We have the Monday, August 2nd is the Board of Education workshop meeting, and is that going to be the workshop budget discussion? So we will have the opportunity to hear public questions on that. And then following that, Tuesday, August 17th, we have a Board of Education business meeting, again, here at regular scheduled time. We've already taken our action on closed session items. Under board communications, I just would like to make a recognition. Mrs. Geddes has been here to the district. Anybody that lives in this community has felt the expansion of communication that she's done on behalf of the district, made some tremendous improvements to our district website. And I'm going to say again, it's hard to be in this town and not have an idea of what's going on with the school with the amount of information that's coming out. She is leaving our district. She is going to be taking on a role at the Glenbrook School District. So I just wanted to take a minute to thank her for the contribution she's made to our district and to wish her well in her new opportunities. So on that, thank you. And I will ask if there's any other board communications. Ms. Hirsch?
The Policy Committee met, I have no idea when, it was 2 weeks ago. Made it through all the February 2010 press updates and are integrating those into our draft policy manual. And I was able to hand off to the other Ellen Walsh, Dr. Krizik's assistant, the revised policy manual. So she has all of the edits. She will go ahead and make those changes, and board members should be expecting to receive a draft policy manual, well, not draft anymore, but a proposed policy manual in short order. And we ask that the board members go ahead and take a look at that. You can compare it against your notes and your record keeping, and please let myself and Ellen know if there are things that you catch. But we are anticipating scheduling a meeting. I believe that you've been polled for availability so that we can go ahead and move forward with the adoption process of the policy manual. So thank you very much for the many, 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 many hours for moving that forward.
Mr. Carlquist?
The role of a board member is year-round, and as evidenced by the meetings that you're going to probably reference or have referenced, for continuing on throughout the summer. But for much of our staff, the year begins in August and concludes in June, or in this case, the end of May. Having this really being our first meeting since we sent another 642 students, give or take a few, off into the world post-District 205, I think it's only appropriate to thank our administration, our staff members across this district for the job that they have done yet again with another group of students. And we look forward to August when we celebrate New Year's and a new school year with the kickoff and the like. Our work continues, but for our staff, for the great job they've done with our students, thank you for another year.
Seeing no further board communications, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved by Ms. Hirsch, seconded by Mr. Carlquist. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.